but it's better. This is I just had to restart OBS. That usually helps with that. So good morning if you're watching. Looks like 2 viewers. All right. Good morning. Maybe that's, I see a couple of people online in Discord, so maybe that's who's watching. I also tweeted about the fact that I'm doing these streams, so and it's it's all public, so hopefully, I mean, I don't know if anyone cares, but maybe some random people are watching too, and if so, then welcome. Good to see you. So today, I have 2 big things on the agenda for today, and they're up there in the screen here. I want to talk about digital poetics kind of briefly, and then get you started working with Python. I want the digital poetics discussion to be kind of brief because I've got some things already for you in Canvas to work through, and I just kind of want to show you what's there. And then I'll get into working with Python because that's what you'll need in order to to complete the poetry project, which is, it's due today, but I mean, what are due dates anyway, right? So let me set up a couple things here in Canvas, and then switch over to my browser, and then get started with some things. So let's see, that's there. Let me switch my Chiron. There we go. So we'll talk about digital poetics first, and then get into some Python stuff using Collab Notebooks. All right, so let me actually reset a bunch of my tabs here. So today I have posted some notes about digital poetics kind of briefly, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. Mainly I want to direct you to taking another look at Charles Hartman's book, Virtual Muse. And I've got a couple of notes in here, but mainly it's chapters 2 and 3 from that book. That's where he really digs into the poetics of randomness and talks about the benefits of randomness for a poet and ways that other people have used randomness, the way he's used randomness in his poetry. And I think it's inspirational. I think it's something that you could use yourself as you're composing your own digital poetry. So let's take a look. Day 1 yesterday, I gave you the task of discovering some digital poetry, and a couple of you have done that. Some of you still haven't, so make sure you do this. So take a look at Chris Funkhauser's book. There's a lot of works listed there. Find one you like, share it in Discord, and a couple of you already did that. That was great. So do that if that's something that you haven't done yet. I really just think it's important to understand what's out there to help you understand what's possible for you to do. So see what you can find and share it if you like it. Yeah, and then we'll see. We'll learn from each other. Oh yeah, sorry. Let me go back here. Also, yesterday I shared a couple of things. So sometimes Canvas does this jumping up and down thing. So I also did a brief introduction to Python. I've written this out as notes in Canvas, but I've also recorded a video basically talking through the same points and demonstrating them. So take a look at that if you haven't already, just to kind of help you understand what Python actually is. And then I've also did something similar for Collab Notebooks. For both of these, I'm not really getting into how to work with them or make things with them, just really what they are and giving you a tour of them. So these are very much introductory, but I think they're helpful if you've never seen Collab before. So take a look at that, and then, on to the next thing. So today, randomness is the topic, or the sense of digital poetics that I'm interested in exploring, and I think you'll find that a relatively good entry point for your own digital poetic work as well. So if you take a look at it, I've got a link to a blog post here by Mark Sample in which he talks about randomness in literary computing. He originally delivered this as a talk at MLA and the Modern Language Association convention, and yeah, so it's a good example of just kind of taking an idea, randomness, and then using that as a thread to explore different works. And so he's exploring different works that use randomness, including one somewhat surprising example from CBS, where for this program called The Thinking Machine, wait, am I streaming? Sorry, I just didn't notice on my dashboard it says I'm not streaming, but OBS says I am. So let me just refresh my stream manager. The stream manager sometimes lags a lot, so yeah, okay, I am streaming. Okay, sorry, I just had to check that. Anyway, this is a program that CBS did, like a kind of a documentary or news magazine kind of show, and they include an example of a script produced by a computer, or produced by asking a computer to make several random choices. And it's pretty interesting, and Mark Sample talks about the algorithm they use, the procedure for producing this. And yeah, it's pretty interesting. I also managed, I found that episode on YouTube, so check it out here if you want to watch that whole episode. It's an hour long. Pretty interesting. I love old stuff like this. Like I love old things about computers. So check that out. The actual drama, the script that they produce takes place at around 32 minutes in. So it's not very interesting, honestly. I don't know if it's a good example of randomness. I mean, it is good in that it's an example of people using randomness, but it's not necessarily. I don't know. The host of the piece is very impressed by it, but I don't know. It's kind of cliche, and that's sort of the point they're making. I think is that cliches are pretty easy for computers to mimic. Well, okay, so we're talking about poetry, and in chapters 2 and 3 of Virtual Muse, Charles Hartman does discuss randomness quite a bit in the context of poetry. But he's not just saying randomness is great, let's use it. He talks about several different things randomness can do, and in particular, he's interested in surprising juxtapositions, or the way that putting things together in ways you didn't expect can produce a poetic insight or moment. And he lists several examples, does some analysis of a couple of different examples, and he has these nice ways of phrasing it. Like he has a really nice, I mean, he is a poet, of course, so he has a good way with words and a good way of phrasing things. And there's several different insights, but sometimes just the similar insights expressed different ways. So what I'd like for you to do is take a look at some quotes here, and I've kind of seeded a few of these. So these are quotes from chapters 2 and 3 of Hartman's book. What I'd like for you to do is pick one of these, find it in the chapter, and complete the quote. So you notice these have ellipses on the beginning, and in some cases the end and the beginning. So find it in context and then complete it with whatever other sentences you feel are necessary to help make the point, and then discuss that a little bit here in the discussion thread. Now these are meant to be discussions, so if you post something, I will respond to you and ask you maybe to clarify your thought. Sorry, didn't mean to do that. Maybe discuss it further. So far, we've just been kind of throwing things out there, and that's it. But I'd really like for you to engage with each other and have this conversation. I will, of course, engage you in conversation. But if you come to this discussion thread and someone else has already posted something, read it and respond to it. Like if you think they have a nice way of explaining something, or you think they missed something about the quote, add your thoughts to this discussion so that we can all learn from each other. This is meant to be a conversation. We have a very small class, so it's sometimes tricky to develop a sense of community online with a small group. So this is one of those things I'd really like for you to think about doing to help us make that, help us cohere a little bit as a group. So add your thoughts. If someone else has already added some thoughts, respond to them, and let's have kind of a conversation there. Okay, so also I would like for you to something else I'd like you to do here is listed at the bottom of the notes for today. I don't know if you read much poetry. I'm asking you to write poetry, so your idea of being a poet probably will benefit from like whatever you think of as poetry. So I don't know what your experience is with poetry, especially contemporary poetry. What I'd like to do to help you get a sense of digital poetry or contemporary poetry rather is go to this website, poets.org. There's lots of ways you can find poetry online. I like this one. So there's, I don't know, there's lots of them, I'm sure. But just to keep things simple, let's start with this one. And find a poem. The thing I like about poets.org is that you are likely to find poetry here that you haven't read before, and as opposed to poems you may know, like the Jabberwocky. Like you may, even if you don't know that poem by heart, you know that it exists, and when you think of poetry, you might think of things like that, or maybe The Raven or something, popular poetry. I don't want you to find popular poetry or well-known poetry, things that you think are poetry. I want you to find something new and try to respond to it, or see what leads you to an emotional response. When we're talking about poetry and producing poetry, it's hard. It's not something that you can just sort of throw some words together and be done. You have to think about what really works. And I talked in the notes today about something that hits. It's like something that like gives you that sort of gut punch of an emotional reaction. Sometimes poetry can do that. I don't know how to explain what makes a poem do that or not do that. I've thought about that, and I've tried to pay attention to it. We don't have to get into that. Sometimes it's hard to explain that, especially if it's a really deep gut punch. But if you find the one that gives you that gut punch or stirs you in some way, just share it in Discord. You don't have to explain it. Often you can't. Just share it, like a link to it, or copy and paste the text of it, just so others can kind of see what led to a response, at least for you. So I'll do that with a couple, but I'd like for you all to start that if you can, just to kind of see what's there. They do this poem a day thing, so that might be a good place to start. There are several that are linked. And just kind of on the homepage, they'll feature different poets, and so just kind of clicking through these things to find something is probably a good place to start. Right, you don't have to know what you're looking for ahead of time. Okay, so that's digital poetics. Now, Python is the main language of interest today. So I have a page here in Canvas that I have not completed yet, but this video that I'm recording now will be part of this page, where I want to talk about working with text in Python. And I think what I'm going to do, I don't want this video to get too long, so probably what I'll do is I'll go into Python basics, and if I have time, then try to build an example. Let me switch my Chiron over. I want to get started with Python, just some basic ideas about syntax and data types, and then if I have time, build an actual poem example. If I don't have time within the hour, I'll just record those videos separately and upload them. And in any case, I will record several shorter videos, kind of zooming in on a particular part of that process, like uploading a file through Collab, exporting your project as a standalone script. Those are some things that just, there's several steps, and it'll be easier for me to explain it by recording a short video doing it. I'll also write out the notes for, step by step for those too. So let's get started with Python. I've been recommending that you work with Collab, so let's go ahead and start a new Collab notebook. You can see here I'm going to collab.research.google.com, and then it pops this up here because I'm already logged into my Google account. I will make a new one here, and I'm going to switch some things about my editor. In the video I did yesterday, I showed you how to switch your editor to dark mode and corgi mode and kitty mode, and I'm going to turn those things off because I find them distracting actually. So you're welcome to make whatever choice you'd like, but I'm going to turn off power mode and corgi and kitty. So it's just a very, very bland, but that's, bland is good. So we'll do getting started with Python. I will also share this Python notebook. I mean, one of the major advantages of working with Collab is that it's all hosted in Google, so it's easy for me to share this notebook. So I'll share this notebook when I'm done with it. Not that it'll be particularly valuable, I think. I'm just, I'm just going to be demonstrating and talking about a few very fundamental concepts with Python. So just a quick reminder about the Collab environment. You've got, your file menu where you can do things with it, but mainly you'll be working with it just in here. Over on the left, this is where we can add files, which we'll get to later. But right here is where we write code, where you see this play button. And so we can write Python code in here. This is Python code. But actually it isn't. I'm just typing here, and nothing's happening because I have not actually written correct Python. The point that I wanted to make is that Python, like any language, has very specific expectations for syntax. And if you get something wrong, then it's not going to understand what you're asking it to do, and so it's going to come back with an error. Errors are good. Errors help you quite a lot in Python because a lot of times they're very descriptive. They're verbose. They say, here's what I think you did wrong, and here's what you probably meant to do. In some cases, they'll just tell you literally what you need to do to fix the error. So I'm going to add some actual Python here, but let me just double check how big this is. Yeah, I'm going to zoom in a little bit on this to make it a bit bigger on the screen relative to me. Let me check again. Yeah, that's better. Okay. So here we go. So this is where we can write some Python. You can also, if you remember with Collab notebooks, you can add code cells by clicking on this, like hovering near the middle and clicking plus code, or you can do it up here at the top. I don't actually want to keep either of these. You can also add text cells, and that's usually what I like to do, is add a text cell at the top, and just explaining what this notebook is. Usually just taking the same title. This is So first of all, I would like to talk about syntax. All right. So let me do, this will be a second order heading here about syntax. And I'm going to just kind of explain a few things and type them in here. So in Python, a lot of the times your syntax is implied. In other words, it's not labeled, different types of things are not necessarily labeled with special characters. Now you may not know that that's normally the case, but in other languages, like I learned Perl first, and Perl is very much into labeling things for what they are by putting special characters in front of or behind or around them. Python is not, and so that's great in the sense that Python's easier to read just visually, but it also means you have to really understand context as you're working with Python. But just a very, let's start with a few very simple examples. Whenever you're writing Python code, often it's useful to comment something, to leave a comment for yourself in code. So let's just start with a comment. This is a comment. If I type with a hash mark in front of whatever I'm typing on that line, that will be a comment. In other words, it's not going to be read as code. In the context of a notebook, it's really the same thing as writing a text cell nearby, but the nice thing about a comment is that you can put it in the middle of your code, and you can also use a comment sometimes to turn code on and off. If there's a line in your program that you think is causing problems, you can comment it out temporarily, run your code without that line, and then see if it made a difference. And if it did, then you can go back to that line and then tweak it. So it's a very useful thing to do, and I like using comments more so than using the text cells around. So this is a comment. Other things you will be frequently doing in code is assigning things, assigning names to things, assigning variables. All right, so let's try a couple of these. In my demonstration the other day, I started with an example, just name. I'll call it my name again. Notice a couple of things about this label. This is my name. I have an underscore here. There are no spaces in it. A lot of times it's actually easier or more conventional, I guess, to make it a single word and all lowercase. You should never create variables with uppercase names, just as a convention, and also it causes a couple of conflicts later, but that's, for now we'll do it like this. And so let me just write my name here. Name equals Zach Whalen. Notice that I put these in double quotes. You can also do single quotes, but this is a string. When we talk about different kinds of data and information that Python can know about, there are several different types, and a string is what this one is called. A string is just a literal list of characters, things that I've typed. It does not have any deeper understanding of this. It does not know that this is a first name and this is a last name. It just knows that these are a list of letters to print in that order whenever I refer to it by the label, which is just name in this case. So that's a name, and that's a string. Notice, by the way, that this is one equal sign. One equal sign is being used for assignment. So one equal sign is used to assign a value to a label or name. So that's what we're doing. When we do conditionals later on, we will see a use for two equal signs. That's when you use for comparison or evaluation. And that's a really easy thing to get confused, and I do it all the time still, where I write some code where I expect to be, I'm trying to do a comparison, but I actually accidentally do assignment, and then I end up, my comparison doesn't work the way I expected it to. All right, so Python can do lots of other things. This is a, let's do just a basic, we'll do an integer. There are two different kinds of numbers, basically, in Python. We'll get to this later. But let's do age, because this is apparently a program about me. Let's do this age as an integer, and I guess I will reveal my actual age here. I just turned 40. Yeah, so what? I don't care. You notice I didn't type this with quotes around it, and that's important. It just interpreted that now as a number, a whole number on a number line with no decimals after it, right? So because this is a number, Python can do different things with it. I'm actually going to save this cell here. I just ran that cell, and so I can show you a couple things that I can do with this number now that I have it. You remember how I showed you could do math? Like you could do things like 6 plus 6. You could have it print the result of that calculation, right? So you could just print 6 plus 6, and you should get 12. 12 is an integer here. You can also do, because I know that age equals 40, and Python knows that as well. Instead of typing 40 out, I could do age. So now this is going to print the age that I will be in 6 years. And this is something now that I could change, and if I had part of my program that needed to do something with my age, I could just change my age once, and then everywhere it referred to my age, it can go, it can do that. Same for you or whoever else, whoever's age I was printing here, it doesn't matter. Okay, so that's an integer. We can also do decimal numbers, and these are called floats. So let's think of what is a real number that would have a float in it, like a decimal. I can't think of an example, so we'll just do, let's see, well, what time is this? It is, I'm drawing a blank on a number I can use as an actual float. Let's do, well, okay, let's do like a tax rate, because that's a typical kind of thing. So we'll do tax rate, tax rate equals, I don't know what the current sales tax is, so let's just say 1.12, right? So 1.12 is a float because it has a decimal at the end, and I can do different kinds of math with floats. They're more precise, obviously, so that's something that you'll end up doing with that. I'm struggling with an example for how to use a float, but they do come up frequently, trust me. The final one, the final basic, I'll show you two more important data types and then move on. So the final thing, and this is really powerful because this is where you can actually start doing complex operations that will produce things like poetry. So this is a list. So let's say, I'll just do a list of children, right? So that's the name of my list, and I'm using the equal sign to assign this. And this syntax is actually exactly like this, at this point anyway, exactly like the syntax that we saw in tracery to create a list. So let's say, I'm not going to actually use my real children's names. So let's say I have a child named George, one named Beatrice, and one named Methuselah. Is that how you spell Methuselah? I don't know, so let's use a different one. Noah, I don't know why I'm thinking biblical here. And Kevin. Okay, so let's say I have 4 children. I do actually have 4 children, but not with these names. And so now I've got a list of children, and I can use them in different ways. So let me show you how we can use a list now that I have a list. Let me make sure to run this cell to save that, and now let's see if I can work with this list. I could print it just like anything else, but it's going to print in a strange way. It's going to print basically the way I wrote it, which doesn't really help me as a poem. Like, that's not something that would be how I would read this. So I need to find a way to think about this as a list. I need to think about each part of this list in a special way. So let's think about, let's do what's called slicing. Let me slice this list so I can look at a specific element in this list, a specific item. So you can slice a list by using square brackets like I'm doing here. Let me make sure you're still in my screen. Okay, good. And that uses a notation where we have to reference the index position of the item we want to look at. And I just have 4 items in here. It wouldn't be hard for me to just print the whole list if I was wanting to do that. But let's say I had a list of several thousand, right? I might not know exactly where to start. But this slice can help you explore a list. Now this is the part this is something that's, for new programmers, can be a little tricky. But whenever we're counting items in a list, the first item is item number 0. So we start counting at 0, not at 1. Now intuitively, like if we had, let's say, a bag of apples, and we started counting them, we would say 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we would have 4 apples. Now, in a list of names that's a computer list, we start with 0. So we have 0, 1, 2, 3 as we go through it. We can reference any one of these by naming the number. This needs to be an integer, but we need to tell it which part of the list we want to see. So let's start with 0. Children 0 is going to be George. All right, and then, as you can probably guess, children 1 is going to be Beatrice. 2 is going to be Noah. And 3 is going to be Kevin. So now we have each one of these items. So this is called slicing, and slicing can be done with a couple of other operators. Let's say we want actually 2 children. We want to see the first 2 children. Well, we could do that as well. So we could say 0, and then use a colon here to say we're going to start with our first child, George, and then we want to go up to the second child. So let's add a 1 here. We're going to go from 0 to 1. And this is going to give us a, oops, so it's not, it stops at that one. So let's go, 2 is going to be the last one. There it is. So that's going to give us our first 2 children. The second part of this tells us where to stop slicing. So it's going to stop, it's going to slice George, then Beatrice, and it's going to stop when it gets to Noah. So that's pretty useful. We can also do a nice little thing where, and this is actually, I don't know if other languages do this, but this is something I found out. This is one of the things when I was learning Python that like totally convinced me Python was worth learning and was great. Oftentimes you want to know what is the last thing, like what is the last thing you added to a list. Python has this great way of doing that where you can add a negative index value. So let's say, who is my most recent child? Children -1 is Kevin. So remember, if you go start, if George is 0, Beatrice is 1, Noah is 2. If we work our way backward from George, it wraps around to Kevin, and that's what we do when we index -1. Pretty convenient. So there's lots of other things you can discover with slices. You can slice it by chunks, and you can do all kinds of things. We don't really need to at the moment, so I'm going to just kind of leave it there, except to show you two more things in terms of Python basics. So one of the neat things about Python too is that you can slice a string the same way that you can slice a list. So my name up here, even though it is a string, I can do the same thing that I did with the square bracket notation to slice out different parts of it. So let's do it like that. So let's do name. Let's do, I'll go ahead and do the print structure here just to kind of make it more consistent. Let's do name 0, and if this were a live face-to-face class, I would ask you before I ran this, what do you think is going to happen? Like, what is it going to print? Some people might say Zach, they would be wrong, but some people might say Z, which is correct. So let's see if this happens. Yeah, so it prints the first letter of my name, which is Z, or the first item in the string of characters associated with the variable name, and it's treating it like a list because I'm asking it to slice that right there. So let's say what if I wanted to get the first 3 letters of my name, or 4 letters of my name rather. There I am, right? Now I knew that my name was Zach and it has 4 letters in it, so I was able to slice it that way. But you know, this is just showing you how slice works. I could also get the last letter of my name, which is N. I could also get, let's see if we can do a slice backwards. No, we can't. Okay. What if we do, let's try different things. Sometimes just playing around to see what happens can be fun. No, it's not going to let me slice negatively that way. There is a way to do that. I'm not sure. Let's see, we can do -4 to -1. That should give me the last bit of my name. Yeah, there you go, Ale. That's getting there. Okay, so slicing can be pretty fun, and you can do interesting things with it. Now, one of the things that we're going to be using Python for is to write poetry, and sometimes it's useful to think of a long chunk of words as a list of words. But we actually have to transform this into a list of words. As we saw with slicing my name, if you want to refer to it using those indexes, then that's great, but it only lets you pick 1 letter at a time. As we know, human language tends to be constructed out of words, and words are separated by spaces. So there is a method called split, where we can take a string of words and split them into a list of words. So let's see how that would look. We'll say, let's do something really simple here. 'Twas brillig and the slithy toes did gyre and gimble. Am I spelling gyre and gimble right? In the wabe. It doesn't matter, right? No, I'm not. Gyre is with a Y. I knew it was. I didn't think that was right. All right, so all mimsy were the borogroves, and the mom wrath outgrabe. So this is a line, the first line and last line actually of the Jabberwocky poem. I was just checking to see if I could wrap the line on that, and I'm not sure if I can. I am going to. No, I mean, I thought I could wrap lines on this. Well, maybe that's one of the settings. Let me see if I can change that. Collab Pro, I don't want that. Huh, okay. I'm not sure why. Maybe it's somewhere else. I'll have to look for it later. But usually, like in a code editor, you can have it wrap a line. So you keep typing, but it goes back to the left so that you can see it all at the same time. Didn't let me do that in that case. That's okay. All right, so just like I did with my name, I can print different parts of my sentence here just by naming the index or slicing it to some part. I'm just guessing here. And, you know, I just sliced a big chunk of it there. That's not very interesting. I could do maybe 35. I don't know. I'm just guessing at numbers here. So you could slice it like that, but unless you know where the words begin and end, you're not going to have a lot of luck slicing it just by number like this. Instead, let's see if we can turn this into a list of words instead of a list of letters, which is what it is already. So let's do this. I'll just make a new thing called word list, and word list is I mean, you notice how I just named it with the underscore here, so it's like one thing, but it's a fairly descriptive name. It's something that when I refer to word list later on, it'll be pretty easy to tell what I was doing with it. So let's take our words and split them. So what I'm doing here is a little bit of magic, but or maybe, I don't know, it's a little bit, it's one of these things that Python is doing. It's doing a lot of work with just a little bit of notation from me. So it takes this thing words, it knows that words is a string. Strings have a built-in function to them called split, and you can access functions by adding the period after the label and then giving it whatever arguments or whatever else you need to give it to do that. So whenever I pass the split function to the string, it's going to split that based on whatever symbol I give it here and then return or assign to the word list variable whatever that list actually becomes. So let's see how that looks. So now that I have this, let's take a look at word list and see if it's what I expected it to be. Great, yeah, so you see it now, it prints the value of each item on a line here. Just that's how the code editor works here. But I can now address each of these words individually by naming an index position. So here's the 7th word, here's the 15th word, and you know, that's how we do it. So yeah, I mean, now I can get specific words, and now I could start maybe building a poem out of random word choices like this. So that's, you know, that's really the main thing I wanted to show you about words. Now, like, you can also, just to show you how this works, I gave it the space character to be the thing by which to split this, but you could split it by anything. Let's say if I wanted to split it by every time the letter G occurred. There's a lot of G's in here. I could do that. It would be a slightly unusual list. Sorry, yeah, you get this error, by the way. This is a good example of, like I was saying earlier, verbose errors. It tells me what's happening here. I gave it an index that was out of range. So I asked for the 15th item of this list, or really the 16th, if we, you know, more naturally want to say it. But this error is telling me that, hey, we don't have that many. That list index is out of the range. It's too long, it's too high. I don't have a 15th or 16th element to show you. So let's start with something much shorter, like word list 2, right? Or word list 9. And yeah, once again, I'm out of range. Now this might happen if you don't know ahead of time how many words you have, but fortunately we can find out how many words we have in this list with another operator I'll show you in a moment. But let's say we just wanted to get the last one. We could always go with -1, and it doesn't matter how many we are. It doesn't matter how many there are. -1 is always the last one. Now, like I said, sometimes it is useful to know how many items are in your list. So there's a operator called length, which is just len, and we can ask for the length of any particular list by passing the list to that. So I'll just call this a, you know what, I'm not going to actually call this a label. I'll just say print whatever the value of word list is, and it's 6. So there are 6 items in this list that I constructed by splitting the words list on the letter G. So great, not very interesting. I'm gonna put this back to a space character. You notice I have to rerun that code and then now that I've rerun that code, there's 23 items in the list if I split on the space character, and that's easier to work with, so I like that better. Okay, so now that I've done this, let's say I wanted to write a poem. One of the things that we're interested in today is randomness, and so let's say we want to pick a random word and then pick another random word and then pick another random word and then pick another random word. I can think of two ways to approach this, and I'll go with the one that's closest to what I've built already, and then maybe I'll do the other one in another video. So Python often works by code that other people have written, and you can use code that other people have written by importing it into your project. Within Collab Notebooks, there's quite a few modules and libraries already built into the environment, and all you have to do to get them into your code is to import them. Sometimes you have to install a module, and we'll do that. I'll do that in the next video. But let's just do one to start with here, which is random. So random is a pretty useful library. Obviously, it's useful for doing things like getting random numbers or getting random words from a list, and this is what we're going to do. So let me just do that here. Now, usually I like to do my imports right at the beginning, and if I have an idea of what I'm doing already and what I'm going to need, I just do one cell that does all my importing and setting up, and then I do all my code work where I'm trying to figure things out. So this is a little bit backwards for me, but this is hopefully demonstrating the concept of importing. And you can see that it's highlighted in purple to indicate that this is a special word in Python, the word import, and it's going to import the random library and modules for me to do different things. So we can do a few things with it. Let's see, and sometimes I have to do a little trial and error to remember how to do these things. I think it's rand range. I think this is right. Okay, good, that's right. So rand range is going to pick a number somewhere between 0 and whatever I give it here. So it's going to give me a random integer. So, okay. So 13 is the range I gave there. Let's say if I wanted to pick a number between 1 and 100, I could ask random to do that here. I'm just kind of rerunning this a bunch of times. That's all it is, right? That's sort of working. You can see the point. They're just going to pick a random number. Technically, it's a pseudo-random number, but pseudo-randomness is good enough for us in writing poetry. There's a whole discussion about what true randomness is and whether it's even possible. But you can see we can keep picking random numbers here. Now, since you'll recall, I can pick a random number. I can pick a word from my word list by naming the number of the position that it appears in that list. So what I could do is pass the result of this random choice to my list, right? So I could have it print a random word from those opening lines by saying print word list, and then in the square brackets, instead of typing the number like 0 or 2 or 3 or 4 or whatever, I could say pick a number and then print whatever word appears at that point. So let me try it, but this is probably going to produce an error, and maybe you can see why. It's a list index out of range error because I've asked it to pick a number between 0 and 100. I don't have 100 items in this list, so it's most of the time going to pick a number that's too big. Of course, I can change the number here to make it the actual length of this list. And there we go. It's picking these one at a time and coming up with something. Right? It's working every time. Now, I know that it's 23 because I just ran that calculation, but I actually don't have to know that. I can ask Python to figure this out on the fly. So let's see if I can do that here. So instead of saying print random range 23, let's do what I did before, right in the place where random is asking how big of a number to pick from. So let me see if I can grab that. Put that in here. Now this is starting to get complex, and you can see I've got a lot of parentheses and square brackets. That's why I've been copying and pasting so that I don't forget a square bracket. But take a look at what the editor does to help me remember that I have, to keep track of my which pair of brackets go together. So as I move my cursor back and forth, it might be kind of faint on the stream here, but it highlights when you put your cursor right in front of a parentheses or a square bracket or other kind of bracket, it'll highlight the corresponding other one. So here's my print statement parentheses. Here's my word list index slicing square brackets. Here's my random range parentheses, and here's my word list parentheses. So they all have to be there, they all have to have a partner, and they all have to be contained correctly. If you miss one, you're going to get an error. So let me show you, you'll get an error here. And this is usually what you'll get, unexpected EOF while parsing. EOF means end of file. So what it's saying is I kept looking for the other part of a parentheses and I never found it. So end of file means I got all the way to the end, I didn't find it, something's missing. And so that's, in this case, it points exactly to where I needed to add that. And now I can run this code. Now, one thing that will happen here is that if you remember, this is going to be picking a number between 0 and whatever. So this is actually not going to be picking 0. It's going to be picking something between these two, up to the length of the word list. So if we want to make it possible for it to predict, to pick twas, which is the first letter, the first word of my sentence, I should do length word list -1. And then that should also make sure that I don't accidentally pick a number too high. And should keep working. So yeah, there we go. Now I can pick a random word from this list, and I could do that to produce a poem if I'd like. If you remember Tristan Tzar's poem, which was How to Make a Dadaist Poem, it said to essentially pick random words until you have a poem. And I think that poem that Tristan Tzar wrote was somewhat self-parodic. It was somewhat meant to be tongue-in-cheek, but we could actually try it out as a method. We could actually follow his instructions using Python and produce a poem. So I think I will probably wrap this stream up here in a minute or two, but I think I'll record a video of me working through that particular problem of trying to follow Tzar's method in a Python notebook. So this is me kind of talking through things. Like I said, I'll share this notebook, but this notebook, as you'll see, isn't very discursive or explanatory on its own, but I'll just share it just for the sake of completeness, just so you can see what I did in case you want to copy something from here. But let me do one final concept that's really important for any kind of text producing kind of things, and that we can use with this particular thing here. Let's try to make an actual poem out of this other poem. So to do that, we're going to need a loop, and that's an important concept that I wanted to make sure to get to. It's so important that I will do a separate video about looping. So let's do it like this. For is going to be how we start a loop, and you notice it turns purple in this editor. That's because this is an important keyword in Python. So a loop is going to go through something that can be iterated, like a list, and iterated means it can go through it one at a time. Each time it goes through that, we need to name that iteration or that list. And so I like to name my iterations something close to what's actually going to be produced. So in this case, I'm going to say for word, but this is me creating this right now. I could call it something else. A lot of times I'll just do a single letter, but just for clarity, I'll just go ahead and do for word. And then I'm going to say for word and what? I'm going to say, I'm not going to go through each item in word list. I'm actually going to create a temporary just placeholder list by using the range function. So I'm going to say range 10, and what this is going to do is it's going to pick, it's going to go through this 10 times. It's going to go through this loop now 10 times to do whatever I say. So if you remember right here, I found that this was something I could use to print a random word from my word list. So I don't know why you can't copy from the right, well, you know, you can, yeah. Yeah, you can copy, but you can't paste for some reason. You can't go right click and then paste code. So I'm going to use Control V to paste that. And that's not what I wanted it to do. I wanted it to paste it here. There we go. And now this is going to hopefully print 10 words. Something that happened here that I wanted to make sure you see is indentation. So within Python, indentation is really important. In other languages, you use brackets to enclose something. In Python, you often just use indentation to show that this statement here, print blah, 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 is part of this enclosing structure, which is the loop. And if you get indentations mismatched, you will get lots of errors. In this particular, the way I've had it set up right here, it looks like it's doing 2 spaces instead of actually the tab character. You can do either. You can either do a specific, like an arbitrary number of spaces, or you can use tab characters, but you have to be consistent. And so I'm just going with what this editor prompted me to do here. And so this should run this code 10 times if I do it right. Let's see. Yeah, okay, all wave and gimbal in were all toes the. Is that a poem? Okay, maybe. Moan were slithy in gyre, the mimsy wraths and wave. It's tricky to call that a poem. This is a particularly tricky example because the whole point of the Jabberwocky poem is that context makes meaning, and so many of these things are not exactly real words, and so when we take context away by printing these randomly, I don't know, and 'twas Rat's Gimble, Slithy Borgrove's Gyre, the Toves. You could call it poetry. It's not doing much for me aesthetically, but you know, if you're the poet, it's up to you, I guess. I would pick a better set of words, honestly, as input, and then perhaps get a better output. Now, poetry doesn't usually write line by line like this, so let's do a little bit of string formatting, and then I'll wrap this up. So instead of printing the word each time it picks one, I'm going to create a string called poem by just saying poem equals and then 2 quote marks to say that this is a string, but there's nothing in it yet. And now as I loop through it, I'm going to add to that string. And then when I'm done with that loop, then I'll print the string. So watch indentation here. So poem is over here on the left, all the way to the left. Then 4 is going to work through my loop thing. But now instead of printing it, I'm just going to add the thing, the randomly chosen words. So let me Control X and then Control V that right here. So then this is going to print this. And well, then when I'm done, I'm going to print the poem. I'm not done yet, so I'm going to add a few more things, but let's see what I've got so far. So now it's going to print the poem after choosing random words. Let's see what happens. All right, so it makes this new word. Brillig did with the word 'twas slyly and did the. It's printed them all together because if you remember, it used the space character to split the word from each other, and so I don't have the spaces anymore. I need to add those back in. So let me just add that in with a quick little line here. So I'm using the plus sign here just to add, this is a plus being used for concatenation because in the context I'm doing string operations here, and that's what concatenation means. It just means add more to the thing you already have. And we've got way, baraz, and all, mimsy, the, and, 'twas, toves. So it kind of looks like a sentence, so that's okay. You know, I'm getting somewhere. So we could probably pick, yeah, I don't know, should we do a line break in here? First of all, let's make this longer. Now we could actually go longer than the original length of our input because you know it's just picking random things and it's picking the same thing sometimes. So this could actually go on forever. We can make this print 20 times. We can make this 500 times, and you know 500 takes about the same amount of time as 20 because this is a computer. It can do things very quickly. Obviously, that's quite long. So let's make this a little bit more reasonable. So let's have it pick line breaks. Randomly. So let's say, so this is now adding a word. So let's say that every now and then we want it to pick a line break so that our poem reads a bit more vertically. So let's say, let's have it pick a random number by, yeah, let's have it essentially roll some dice. And then if it lands on, let's say this is an imaginary 3-sided dice. No, let's say 4-sided dice. No, let's say 6-sided dice. If this is a 6-sided dice, if it rolls a 1, then we're going to print a line break and go on to the next line. So let's use our random function again for that. So if rand range 6 equals 1, and then notice I've got my same syntax here with the colon and then a tab over to show that this is part of this particular control structure. Then I'm going to say poem plus equals, so I'm concatenating onto it, a line break, and the /n is how we do that. So let's see if this prints what we want it to. Oh yeah, it works. Okay, great. I wasn't sure actually if that would work, but it does. So that's kind of looking like a poem, at least visually, and that's something. So sometimes you can use is, and I kind of forget when you're allowed to use is as the comparison operator as opposed to the 2 equal signs. But I guess this is one case where I can use is. Yeah, so I'm down to 1 viewer. So whoever you are that's stuck through it, hello, and thank you for watching. But I am about to wrap it up here. Let me just show you what would happen if I made a common mistake, which is something I do all the time actually. I'm saying I want to know if the random roll out of a 6-sided die was a 1 or not. And I've used an equal sign. Let's find out. Now that's actually not going to work. Actually, this gave me an error, a syntax error. But really what would be the problem is a single equal sign is assignment, and an assignment will always be true or always false, as it is in this case. And so it would always roll, it would either always roll the line break or never roll the line break. And that's not what I want. I want to roll it every 6 times or so. And so that's why it needs to be 2 equal signs. Okay, so I kind of got a little more deep into this than I originally intended, and I hope it was helpful. I know this is a lot, but by recording this as a video, you can look at or replay or focus on the parts that you're interested in. I'm also going to record a few videos just focusing on 1 or 2 specific things so that you can just look at those videos if that's the question you have. So I'm going to wrap it up here. Whoever you are, thanks for watching, and have a good day.